as of yet, it doesn't feel as though it is a story that is threatening Donald Trump's presidency. If you look at how Keir Starmer, who is not in the Epstein files in the same way that US president is, currently is facing questions, having lost his chief of staff, about his judgment in relation to Peter Mandelson. I don't think the problem's completely gone away for the US president, but I think that, and certainly I think when you think to members of his team, you know, his commerce secretary is facing questions. Elon Musk is having to defend himself. You know, it's not as though it's case closed, but it just doesn't have quite the same level of pressure as it currently does in the UK.
So, what are we expecting to see today? I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell is set to testify in Congress. What's the expectation?
I think the expectation is fairly low in terms of how illuminating this appearance is going to be. Ultimately, there's a few things to take into account. One is, like with much of the evidence that's taking place behind closed doors, is a closed hearing. We know that, for example, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, who are also expected to give evidence at a later date, have been pushing back at this. But therefore, there's no live stream, so to speak. But I think most importantly, everything that we are hearing from her side is that she's not going to be saying very much at all, and instead we're going to see Ms. Maxwell pleading the fifth and using the Fifth Amendment to really not answer questions for risk of potentially incriminating herself or adding to the situation she is already in, because, of course, she is currently in jail.
And is there a significant line of questioning that we expect this to follow? I mean, is there one issue that they're going to zero in on, because there is such a broad range of things that Ghislaine Maxwell could be asked about?
Well, it's right to say it is such a broad range of topics she could be asked about, particularly since the latest release of the Epstein files,
Yeah.
which, we're speaking, and look how that has shaken up UK politics. And you can say it's not had quite the same effect in the US, if we're looking at the fallout, but still, there are lots of questions here being asked as a result of those files. There were questions for Donald Trump, but particularly for members of his own team. Howard Lutnick, for example, the Commerce Secretary, is in there. Elon Musk is mentioned. Now, of course, being in the Epstein files is not proof of wrongdoing. And there are many denials, people saying there's nothing to see here. But I think we're still feeling the shockwaves from the latest tranche of files. When it comes to what the committee would most like to use their time on, I think there are lots of questions for Ms. Maxwell when it comes to, you know, does she have information when it comes to apparent co-conspirators with Jeffrey
Mm.
Epstein? When it comes to, who should be in jail, and is there missing information that would help bring some of those things to light? And that's one of the main things that's been talked about ahead of her appearance.
Do you think she'll name names? Because she has apparently claimed that 29 associates of Epstein were being shielded by the US government.
Well, quite. And I think that is one of the things the committee wants to know, which is if you think these people are being shielded and there's more case for prosecution, jail time, so she is not one of the few in jail, would she say something? But so far, the implication from her lawyer and her legal team is that's not something she's planning to bring up in this hearing.
Mm.
And of course, when it comes to her own case, we know that she spoke to the Department of Justice a few months ago, last year. We know that after that meeting, she was actually moved from a high security prison to a low security prison. She clearly could have things to add, but the suggestion so far is that this is not going to be the forum where she is most likely to do that, and it's more likely to be these private conversations
Right.
with legal figures if she is going to go there.
And what's the expectation in terms of someone like Peter Mandelson being asked to come and give evidence, for example? I mean, there've been conversations about this in the past. Is it likely to happen?
Well, this is something along with Andrew Mountbatten, formerly Prince Andrew, that has come up a lot. Keir Starmer, of course, said that Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, should appear.
Mm.
When I interviewed Peter Mandelson, an interview that began before the latest tranche documents, then our final conversation was amid those coming out, really. So I wasn't in position to put everything to him. Lots of the sensitive material came out the following day, but I did put as much as I could. And this is one of the things I raised to him. I think probably in his last comments to a journalist, and I said, would you give evidence to Congress?
Mm.
It seemed like it was going to be one of the areas it went. And he said he didn't think there's anything he could add that Congress didn't already know, suggesting everything in the files was a surprise to him. So what I would take from that, and people have their own opinions, is he had no inclination to. And I think, like with Andrew, formerly Prince Andrew, the thing to note here is the committee really is quite toothless in terms of how much it can compel a foreign citizen to appear before it. So unless those individuals want to, or they feel there is pressure which forces them to, that the committee and the US is limited in how much they can really do.
Finally, Katie, you mentioned earlier that the appetite for this story is very different in America. I mean, it's obviously had a huge impact on the government here in the UK. Is there any sign that there might be increased interest and that might touch the president at all?
It's still a story that dominates the news in many ways when it comes to the fallout from the Epstein files. But as of yet, it doesn't feel as though it is a story that is threatening Donald Trump's presidency. If you look at how Keir Starmer, who is not in the Epstein files in the same way that US president is, currently is facing questions, having lost his chief of staff, about his judgment in relation to Peter Mandelson. I don't think the problem's completely gone away for the US president. But I think that, and certainly I think when you think to members of his team, you know, his commerce secretary is facing questions. Elon Musk is having to defend himself. You know, it's not as though it's case closed, but it just doesn't have quite the same level of pressure as it
Mm.
currently does in the UK. And I think there's a few ways of looking at it. Some people I've spoken to say, well, the UK is better at applying standards. And if this were the UK, for example, some of the questions around the Commerce Secretary, for example, I've spoken to figures here in DC. They said that would be a really big story leading the news. Did he was he not clear about how many times he met this guy? What does that raise? And it doesn't feel quite like that here. I mean, Donald Trump has claimed he's been cleared by what was in the latest Epstein files. There's still plenty of questions, but I don't think it has quite the same feeling of almost a pressure cooker, or
Yeah.
the sense it's changing it. It's definitely fair to say that the Epstein files have changed the political weather in DC as well, and in America. And look how it has dominated parts of Trump's presidency when it
Mm.
comes to the fact that Congress forced the release of the
Yeah.
files, even though the president wasn't keen.
Katie Balls, thank you so much.